Compound V is the substance responsible for creating all the supers within the boys' universe. A drug developed by German geneticist Friedrich Vought during World War II. And yes, just like many concepts in this universe, Compound V draws inspiration from an already recognizable element that's part of another franchise. In this case, the Super Soldier Serum, which gives Captain America his superhuman strength. And just like its Marvel inspiration, Compound V had more than one version throughout history. In this video, we'll talk about the timeline of Compound V, its development, and its three main versions that we can observe throughout the series of The Boys, and how each of these versions establishes a hierarchy of power among the supers in this universe. If this interests you, get comfortable and settle in, because I'm going to tell you absolutely everything. My name is Didier Solanilla, and this is Solamatográficos. During the course of World War II, German geneticist Friedrich Vought began working on research that would change the world forever, the creation of Compound V, a serum that would grant its host almost godlike abilities. In 1940, alongside molecular biologist and Darwinist Thomas Godolkin, Friedrich Vought would create the first iteration of Compound V, also known as V1 or Compound V1, with the first successful test subject being his own wife, Clara Ressinger, who would later take the alias Liberty and subsequently appear in Season 2 of The Boys as the superheroine Stormfront. The original formula, or V1, was a stabilized version of Compound V and far more potent than the modern Compound V used to create the members of the Seven. It could work without any issues in adults and granted extremely powerful abilities while also slowing down or stopping the aging process. Friedrich Vought's original purpose was not to create superheroes, but rather to improve the human species through genetic manipulation, giving rise to superior beings. And while the military context of the era pushed the creation of Compound V as a resource to develop a new type of weapon, the truth is that creating German super soldiers wasn't really part of Friedrich's motivations. His goal was simply to elevate the human species to the next evolutionary step and turn mortal beings into virtual gods. However, with the imminent fall of the German forces long before Compound V could be used for military purposes, Friedrich makes a desperate move to save the research that took him a lifetime, and in 1944 he joins the enemy side, defecting from his German origins and nationality to be secretly brought over along with his wife and his team to the United States, promising the Americans to use his knowledge and the formula of Compound V in order to create super soldiers for the United States. And immediately after his transfer, he began working with the American government on the creation of Soldier Boy, the first great American superhero. Once the Second World War came to a close between 1948 and 1950, Friedrich Vought, along with his team, founded Vought International, a mega corporation whose initial purpose was to continue research focused on how to improve the human race through drugs and other technologies. But without a military threat to fight, Vought began turning superheroes into a massive corporate business, making huge profit its main goal. Between 1960 and 1967, Vought International, which already had nearly a decade of experience creating superheroes through the use of Compound V, decided to try and improve the V1 formula in order to create even stronger and more powerful superheroes. Friedrich Vought assigned his right-hand man, Thomas Godolkin, as the one in charge of enhancing the Compound V formula, and thus the Odessa program was born. By researching the fundamental properties of Compound V and how it bonds to human cells, Godolkin realized something very important. The earlier Compound V is introduced into a person's body, the greater the Supes' potential would be as they developed. Up until that point, Compound V had only been used on humans in their adult stage, like Stormfront and Soldier Boy. But Godolkin had discovered that Compound V fused much more effectively with the cells of an organism that was still in a developmental stage. And to carry out the creation of even stronger superheroes, the Odessa program was created, which involves administering compound V to individuals at the blastocyst stage, a very early stage of embryo formation. But to achieve a more successful fusion between the blastocyst cells and compound V, a less aggressive version of the serum was needed. And that's how the second iteration of compound V was created, known as V2, or simply compound V. In theory, Odessa should create the most powerful beings on Earth. However, the program turns into a complete failure, as all test subjects who were conceived through in vitro fertilization died shortly after birth due to the serum. On top of that, between 1970 and 1980, one of the most tragic events for the company occurs as the mind behind Compound V, Frederick Vought, passes away. The exact date of his death is not confirmed in any official franchise material, but perhaps with the premiere of the Vought Rising series, the character's canon will be explored a bit more. A very important detail is that despite his death, the series clearly implies that Vought never fully abandoned his extremist beliefs, as characters like Stormfront and Thomas Godolkin, who gains powers and superhuman longevity by injecting himself with a prototype version of V2 in 1962, would continue pushing for the creation of a world dominated by superior beings. The Odessa program was considered a complete failure until 1981, when the first successful Odessa case in history was recorded. This is how Homelander was born. In a desperate attempt to create a superior superhero, Vought takes the genetic material of Soldier Boy, one of the most powerful superheroes ever created, and once again, through in vitro fertilization, a child is conceived who would be born to become the strongest superhero on the planet. Even though the Odessa program had a success rate of less than 1%, the V2 would become the most widely used version of the serum to create the next generations of superheroes. Unlike the original formula, the new V compound was a more stable, less aggressive, and easier to mass-produce version than the original. And on top of that, it could be used on newborn babies. This is how Vought International would set in motion a sinister plan that would take the company's purchasing power to the next level. Vought would start making deals with financially desperate parents to inject the new version of Compound V into newborn babies. In exchange, the parents would receive large sums of money and the promise that their children would develop superpowers destined for greatness and glory. And because the new Compound 5 was much easier to mass produce, this process was carried out on a massive scale. All with the goal of creating an unlimited variety of new superheroes, turning them into public figures they could profit from, and repeating the process indefinitely. Since the children were injected with the drug as newborns, they grew up believing their powers were a divine gift they were born with. And because the public also believed superheroes were naturally born, it fed the narrative of being chosen by God, which made the superheroes even more marketable. Even though the process was repeated on millions of individuals, very few heroes could actually measure up to someone like Homelander. The second version of Compound V was more stable, allowing many individuals to be successfully converted into supers, but the vast majority developed completely useless powers that weren't really suited for combat. That's why in the boys' universe, many supers have absurd powers that aren't necessarily the most impressive in the genre. Sometime later, as a means of containment to create a super as powerful as Homelander, the Odessa program was reactivated by Vought, and despite advances in technology, only one subject managed to survive the process, Marie Moreau. That's why in Gen V we're told that Marie Moreau is just as powerful as Homelander. In theory, the way Compound V is integrated into these two characters' cells makes them stronger, putting them a league above the rest of the supers. However, Marie Moreau has one disadvantage. Unlike Patriot, who has spent years mastering his powers, Marie Moreau doesn't have full control of hers yet. Alright, we've already talked about the original Compound V, the V1. We've talked about the second iteration of Compound V, which is modern Compound V, and we've talked about the Odessa program. However, we still need to talk about one more version of the serum, and that is temporary compound V, also known as Temp V. The third and final version of compound V is temporary compound V, or Temp V. Temporary compound V is a version of compound V that gives its host superpowers for around 24 hours. This was created for military purposes, since Vought International would spend years trying to integrate Supes into the ranks of the US military. And it was made this way so that soldiers, losing their powers after 24 hours, wouldn't become a volatile, all-powerful problem like Homelander did. Temp V is a reference to the Boys comics, where the team members take a less aggressive version of Compound V to fight the Seven. However, the series gives it a military background, and its green color reminds us of kryptonite, since Homelander is an evil Superman, and Temp V would be the only way for mere mortals to rival him, implying that Temp V is Homelander's kryptonite. And thanks to this version of the serum, we saw characters like Huey and Butcher have superpowers for around 24 hours, though the formula was pretty unstable, basically cooking their brains. Personally, I would have loved to see Mother's Milk with the temporary compound V. Now, let's talk a little more about the power hierarchy established by these different versions of compound V within the Boys universe. I have a short dedicated entirely to this topic on the channel, but I'll briefly go over it here. Basically, at the very bottom of the list, we have all the supers created with the modern compound V. This can vary a little from super to super. Not every super with modern compound V in their blood is super weak, but yeah, most of them are. Just a bit higher up, we have characters created with the temporary compound V who tend to have the ability to rival the strongest beings using the modern compound V. We even see in the show Butcher himself going toe-to-toe with Homelander using this version of the serum. Higher up on the list, we have the first generation of heroes who were created with the original compound V, or V1. Since this was a much more aggressive version of the serum, it allowed for better bonding to human cells, resulting in far more powerful superheroes. That's why the first generation of heroes includes the strongest supers seen in the franchise, like Soldier Boy and Stormfront. A little higher up, and as we already explored in the video, we have the characters created through the Odessa program. Odessa uses modern compound V, which is used in the creation of most supers in this universe, but the treatment with which it's applied is different. When applied at the blastocyst stage of an individual, it allows for a better amalgamation of compound V with the super's genetic material, which makes them stronger. But since it's such a complicated and aggressive process for human cells, not everyone can withstand it. And only two characters have managed to survive it, Homelander and Marie Moreau. Finally, we have the top tier of the strongest characters, which are the naturally born heroes. So far, in the show and in the comics, there is only one character in this category, and that's Ryan. And basically, following the same ideology put forward by Thomas Godokin, Ryan acquires his powers long before his conception. Therefore, compound V, which comes from Homelander himself, who is Ryan's father, has much more time to create a better amalgamation with Ryan's genetic material, which potentially makes him the most powerful Supe in this entire universe. And now guys, I think with this ranking, we've reached the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it and that the explanation of how these different variants of compound V were created was pretty clear. A lot of what I covered in this video obviously comes from the show, the comics, the spin-off series Gen V, and hopefully we'll get to see much more of this lore in Vought Rising. However, for now, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you want more videos like this where I break down the lore of things, go ahead and like, follow, and take a look around my channel where you'll find a lot more content about the Boys universe. In the meantime, good luck, and remember, there's nothing quite like seeing it with your own eyes rather than just hearing about it. Bye.